Hello and welcome. My name is Michelle Glover. I am the Lab Business Development Manager at Dentsply Canada. Today, we're going to take you through a virtual training, which is your initial onboarding for the Dentsply inLab solution. So thank you so much for joining us for this digital journey, if you will. So I know that you've had your prime scan training now at this point in time, or your INEOS X5 training at this point. So this is essentially acting as your training for just your initial introduction to the inLab software, okay? Because with the inLab software, we're going to grow you to, of course, be able to design your complete dentures, whether it's complete over natural, whether it's an immediate denture, whether it's a complete over complete case. But to get started, we need to learn kind of the basics. So you're going to hear from me for probably the next hour and a half to 2 hours or so. There's going to be a lot of information, but again, the beauty of this being a virtual session is that you can pause me at any point in time, catch up on your own screen, and then continue to press play. So feel free to pause me as needed. And then what you're going to see is following my session, you will see Jonathan Verroche. He is a denturist here in Ontario, Canada, and he himself has invested in the full Dentsply solution. So he's able to do a really great job in terms of, kind of speaking more about it from an actual perspective of course, the denturist community. So what you are going to see on my screen right now is the inLab software. So when you first open the inLab software, and the inLab software will be the icon on your desktop that looks like basically a horseshoe of teeth. So you're going to see kind of a full arch of teeth. Now, whether you are designing a custom tray, a model, or a denture, you always get to everything from this software. Okay, and that'll make sense in just a moment. But the reason that's important to note is because you don't want to get into this idea that you're going to have to, of course, manually import cases into the Splint application or manually import things to the model phase. You get to all of it from this design software, and then it's all bridged over. Okay, now before we get started on that though, I'm going to just stop sharing my screen for a moment, and I'm going to share the web page, because what we want to do here to start, if you haven't already, is we want to create a new lab profile on the actual internet. Okay, so just going to open up here. Okay, so I've got my web page open. You're going to type in Connect Case Center into a web browser. Okay, so basically Google or whatever it might be, Microsoft Bing in this case, you'll type in Connect Case Center. Once you do so, you're going to see this option here that says customer.connect case center, and you're going to select that link. As soon as we do that, we are going to basically see the option to learn more about the actual Connect Case Center portal. You're going to have the login page and the register page. Now, this might already look familiar to you from when you registered as a clinician, if you are utilizing your prime scan to send to, laboratories and things like that. However, now we're going to register you as a laboratory. The reason being is that when you are utilizing prime scan to inLab as an integrated solution, you're essentially communicating from your prime scan directly through the portal to now your inLab software. So I'm going to show you today how to download files from your inLab software. However, I first want to show you how to register as a lab, go through that process so that you can see kind of the full workflow. So what you'll do is you'll select the register now option. As soon as you do so, you're going to see that there's two options, dentist registration and laboratory registration. So as a denturist, you are now considered both. So congratulations, you are both a lab technician and a dentist all at once. But what you were going to do is we're going to bypass the dentist registration, because you would have already done that for your prime scan at the time of training. We're now going to select laboratory registration. So you're going to choose basically a lab name. Okay, so you can just basically choose whatever name you want. If it does say that it's already taken, you just have to choose something else. Most people, if they are, of course, a denture clinic like yourself, you'll want to maybe just differentiate between your dentist account and your lab account. So sometimes people will just put, digital dentures lab, right? Or, dentures rock lab, whatever it might be. You get the kind of idea, but it is important to note that for the username, you don't use your actual email. It's similar to kind of like an Instagram handle where you kind of come up with a username as opposed to just your email. So then you choose a password. Okay, and then you're able to proceed to step 2. Now, basically, any of the items here that says, you know, the fact that you have a first and last name with the asterisk, you do have to have those details in. Your email, test@gmail.com. All right, perfect. So for your email address, it's whatever email address you want it to be notified anytime you send yourself a case. Again, because you're sending to yourself from both cases, sometimes people might do the office email for one and a personal email for another. Again, you're not going to the email for anything but just the notification that says you've gotten a case. And when you initially set this up, we do have to validate it as you did with your doctor account. So it does request that you go back into your email and then just validate that new case, or sorry, that new account, and then you're able to proceed. So your company, you're able to just put your company. Again, most people, if they put their clinic name, they'll just identify basically that they have, basically they'll just put in their phone number and email address, okay? So then your email again. Okay. So when you move forward here again, the address, okay, you can just fill in kind of whatever you need to in terms of the address. However, for the zip code, if you put in, you know, dashes the last time, so let's say for your doctor account, you did, you know, something like this where you had the space, I would recommend for your lab account just maybe doing a dash or just no space at all. You want something to be a little bit different from your doctor account. Otherwise, the software is going to flag it as already an existing account, okay, because it's the same data essentially. That's why sometimes people might put their personal address on it if they want, because again, it really is just for your own information, but really up to you. So then once you have completed that, you hit I accept the terms and conditions. You have to identify that you're not a robot, and then you select done. Okay, so when you select done, an email will be sent to the email that you just created with the, or the email that you plugged in for this account. Okay, and then at that point in time, you're basically able to go to your email that you just created it with and validate that email address. Okay. Now, the important thing at that point is then to remember that you would then need to go in. So I'm just going to now close that out and open up a new tab again. So at that point in time, when I log into my clinic account, so if this is my clinic account here, I'm going to log in. So I'm now logged into my clinic account. Okay. So when I'm in my clinic account, the one thing that I want to do is I want to link my favorite recipient, okay, meaning my favorite purchaser, the person that I'm sending to. So of course, if you've linked any of your laboratories, that's where they'll show up here. But what you can do is you can search the recipient. So you can actually search for yourself. I recommend searching direct, and then the country, just obviously identify Canada as the country. And then what you're able to do at that point is you're able to actually enter in the zip code. So when you enter in your clinic zip code, it's going to show you like a very small condensed list of laboratories around you, and you should see your new laboratory active there. However, you have to make sure that you've activated your account first. Can't stress that enough. You have to activate the account first via email, because again, you will get an email directly after you create your lab account, and you just want to make sure that you hit that validate button in the email that the portal sends you, okay? Because you will not show up on the portal until you are activated, okay? So once you have your account completed, now again, I've already selected myself here as a laboratory, so I'm able to send myself details essentially, okay? So I'm just gonna stop sharing the screen again, and I'm gonna reshare now the inLab software. So the very first step is always to, of course, first create your account on the portal. And again, you wanna create it as a laboratory because we've already created our dentist account, our clinician account. So now you've linked basically the two together. Okay, so you've identified now when you are in your prime scan, you are going to actually see when you're in the Connect Case Center portal, you will see any laboratories that you've already added. Maybe you're sending to a laboratory for partials, or maybe you're sending to Atlantis for items like Conus precision attachments, whatever it might be. Any of your accounts that you have connected to will show up in the portal. And once you connect yourself with your lab account, the same thing can be said. You will basically be connected at that point to yourself from both your clinic and lab aspect. So once you are in now the inLab software, okay, so essentially we can see here that we're in our opening screen. Now our opening screen of inLab, essentially what you're seeing here is any of your existing patient cases. Okay, so anything that you've downloaded from the portal, anything that you've designed will be saved here, so you can always access it and open it again. However, if we want to now download a case from the portal, so again, we've on our Prime Scan, we've sent a case through to ourselves. So I encourage you at this point in time, pause this if you haven't already sent yourself a case, pause it, and then just now try sending yourself a case over from your Prime Scan Connect. Okay, so go into the Connect software as you normally do, open up a pre-existing case, but now when you direct it through to the portal, you're going to now see yourself as an option under the laboratories. Select yourself, submit that cart, and it'll come through to the portal. Now, what's really nice about the portal is it is an instant transfer of patient data. So as fast as your internet allows, from your Prime Scan to your desktop inLab software here, it's going to send that fast. Okay. So at this point in time, we were able to select the Connect Case Center tab on the bottom of the screen. And as soon as we do that, it's going to take us to a login page. So when we're in the login page, I encourage you to select the remember password, but you're essentially going to plug in your username for your lab account now. Okay, so the account that we just created here today, you're now going to plug in those details and the password, and you're going to select login. So when we log in here, we're going to see the portal on the laboratory side of things now. So this is where the lab is able to look at the files, determine if they accept or decline the case, and then download directly into the inLab software. So that's what we're going to do right now. All right. So when you basically come in, okay, to the portal, you're going to see here under recipient, which is what we are as the laboratory, we're receiving the cases. You're going to see 4 tabs along the side, the far left-hand side. So top one is new orders. So that's suggesting any new case that has come through from the portal, that'll be sent under the new orders. Then there's accepted and declined orders. The reason being is that laboratories do have the ability and the functionality to accept or decline a case from a clinician. The reason that they would be able to decline is, let's say the doctor hasn't given them a very good scan, or there's data missing. The idea is that they can decline it, have a real-time conversation with the doctor before the patient is left, and then they can rescan and send it through the portal again. However, for yourselves, because you're both the clinician and the laboratory at this point, you're really never going to have to decline the case, right? You're always going to be able to accept it, unless you've maybe sent the case twice, because maybe you did clean up the scan a little bit prior to sending. So if that's the case, of course, you do have the ability to decline, but you yourselves are always going to kind of accept the cases. And then the final tab is all orders. So that combines accepted, new, and declined orders all under one bucket. So if you're in the new order window, you're going to see here I have a new order from a colleague here that was doing a test. But I'm going to highlight that top case here. And you're going to see next to it, I've got 3 options right now. There's a few that are grayed out. But this first one says show conversation. When you select show conversation, what it essentially does is it starts a chat between your inLab PC and your Prime Scan. So it's almost like a Facebook Messenger sort of thing. Again, however, most of us are using our Prime Scan and our inLab software within the same clinic. So if that's the case, you're really just starting a conversation within the clinic through the messenger. Okay, so again, this is designed for a lab and a dental office to be able to communicate back and forth. So you certainly can. You can send yourself notes if you wanted, maybe on the case. So that's certainly feasible with the show conversation option. But again, it's not mandatory to utilize this function. So then next to this one is check order. That's where we're going to go in just a moment here to actually check the impressions and accept the case, because regardless of if you are always going to accept the case, you always do it through the check order option. Then the other option here is show work ticket. So if you wanted to actually create a PDF kind of prescription to be able to print and put in your case pans in the lab, you could. Okay, so the idea is that it will generate that prescription, and then you're able to download and save those details, for printing. But we're going to select the check order option here. and it's going to take us into the portal. So essentially now we're in the check order window. Okay, so we can tell because on the bottom of the screen here, it's kind of highlighted in that orange yellow color. And you're going to see here, it'll show us the purchaser, the order date, and then the patient name and all the details that go with it, and then the return date as well. So obviously on your prime scan side of things, you have to, identify the return date. However, you are able to, of course, just kind of fill in whatever you need to, because again, you are both the lab and the clinic. So because of that, you can obviously identify whatever you need to on your prime scan side of things before sending through to the portal. So then where the additional instructions of the purchaser come into play, again, if you've taken any notes or if you've attached any additional files from your prime scan, maybe pictures or anything like that, they'll show up here, right? So you're able to attach those, of course, from your prime scan, and then they will show up here. Now, there's an option here that says check impression. I do say that this is optional. The reason I say that this is optional is because, again, you've already taken the scan yourself. So you know exactly what your scans look like because you saw that on the prime scan side of things. So you can choose to still look at the case here under check impression. However, it is going to take a few seconds to load. So sometimes if you want to save time, people will just hit accept and then download the case into the inLab software to view it, but it is completely up to you. If you do choose to accept it at this point in time, you can see here in this particular case, just one scan has been taken, okay? But I can essentially see the scans here for the patient. Okay, so I can see under display objects, right now the lower jaw is selected, so it would have just meant that this was scanned in the lower catalog on the prime scan. So I can obviously adjust that here if I need to. But then there's the option here to accept or decline the case. Okay, so at this point in time, I just scroll down and you'll see accept or decline. So I'm going to select accept because of course I'm going to accept this case to download into inLab. So now you're going to see that we're automatically in the accepted order tab. Okay, so with this, we can see basically any accepted cases will show up here. Now you're going to notice where show work ticket used to be the last option. It's now kind of the middle option. Right next to it, you're going to see this kind of arrow pointing down into half of a rectangle. And that is, if you hover over it, it'll say download and open case. So this allows you to do exactly that. You can download and open the case directly into the inLab software. So once it shows up in the inLab software, there's a couple key things that I want to show you. One is that it does follow the same kind of pattern that the PrimeScan software works off of in terms of administration being your prescription, in terms of the scan step being, of course, scanning, and then the model phase. And then the only difference is that yours, your prime scan stops at the model phase and then you go on to the connect portal, whereas this we can continue on into design and exporting. But what you are going to notice here though is when you are in administration, there are a lot more indications under the different options in terms of what you're going to design. So the idea here is if you look, we're on the administration phase of the sidewalk. So the sidewalk being this top screen here. But then there's always that secondary sidewalk along the bottom of the screen that's going to identify to you specifically what you're going to be designing today, right? So when we look at this tab here, this secondary sidewalk within the administration step, it says define restorations. So it wants to know, what are you designing today? So if I wanted to, under restorations, you're going to see crown and bridge, of course. So you might be thinking to yourself, I'll never have to use that tab as a denturist, but that's actually not the case. Eventually, if you do, advanced workflows like implantology, implant supported bars, implant supported dentures, whatever it might be, you will actually utilize this tab. So it really is a nice workflow. But again, that's the advanced stuff. So we'll take it in baby steps. I do encourage you to come to the level 1, 2, and 3 programs at our Dentsply Sirona Academy here in Mississauga, Ontario. It's a beautiful state-of-the-art facility where you get hands-on experience with the software, learning from a fellow denturist. So it is a great opportunity to learn and grow with the technology. But again, I always recommend to start with the basics, which is exactly what we're doing here today with your initial onboarding. So then from the indications here, I'm going to select the model step. Okay, so I do want to mention here, this again was initially selected as a crown on the doctor side. So I'm just going to select delete here. It's going to ask me, am I sure? But then you'll see here that we've got model. So that's telling the software that we're going to design a model today for 3D printing. Then we've got partial framework. So again, you don't have to design your own frameworks, but in the software, you have the functionality to design the framework if you'd like for a partial. Now, I will mention this is designing specifically a framework. Okay, so this is not giving you sockets to plug in teeth or anything like that. It is still a traditional framework in all intents purposes. And then at that point in time, you can choose to, mill it in either metal alternatives like a flexible partial, or you can send to a lab to have them mill in metal like titanium, or you can even have, a printer print it for you in what's known as a burnout resin, so that you can still cast it the traditional way that you normally would. Or again, most denturists that I see often will send through the portal to a laboratory. So of course, that's still a functionality that you can do as well too. But again, the partial is there for you should you ever wish to utilize it. Then we have Splint and Tray. So I know that several denturists communities across the country are able to design night guards. So that's the Splint, whereas some cannot. So if you can, of course, you can use the Splint application to design your night guards for your patients or yourself. However, you will utilize that application for designing custom trays. And so with custom trays, that includes both implant supported impression trays, either closed or open trays, and then of course fully edentulous trays as well too. And then of course dentures, that's our complete denture tab. Then we've got the CEREC guide. So that is a really specific type of surgical guide. If you work with a doctor that has a Dentsply Sirona CBCT, you're able to design CEREC guides for them, which is a type of surgical guide. And then the other option here is Atlantis. So again, if you are familiar with Atlantis, that is our implant partner where you're able to get things like implant supported bars manufactured, or even conus precision attachments, kind of in between a locator and a fixed case. It's very sturdy like a fixed case, but it is technically allowing the patient to remove that prosthesis in and out of their mouth. So you can of course have the Atlantis functionality to upload all of your scans directly to the portal. And we've got great support here in Canada with Atlantis, where you're able to, of course, have somebody help you out if you need any assistance in uploading your first case, or looking at the initial proposal that they provide you before you accept the case. Really great support that you can get for the Atlantis functionality. But to start, I'm going to show you the model builder workflow, okay? Because again, it is important to note, where you're actually going to design a model. Again, if you ever want to 3D print a model for a partial or 3D print a model for study model purposes, whatever it might be, you're going to identify the model. Now I've selected the lower jaw. As we know, it was an upper jaw, but again, I'm just designing a model. So I'm just selecting the lower jaw because I know that that was what was selected on the prime scan side of things. But when I move forward to the model phase, you're going to see here that it follows a sidewalk, right? So you can see here that we're in the model step, but it won't let us move forward until these steps on the bottom sidewalk are complete, the secondary sidewalk, if you will. So this very first tab is known as Edit Model. You're going to notice that this is very much similar to the step that you have in your prime scan, right? To basically identify any changes that you want to make to the model. However, we have a few more additional options in the inLab software edit model phase. So the form tool, the exact same as prime scan, you can add material, smooth material, or remove material from the model. Then we've got the cut tool where you can of course cut and remove any materials that you need. Then you've got the replace tool. You do not have this currently in the prime scan, but it's a really great function that I'm going to show you what it can do, because it can do a couple things. It was designed to be able to fill in small voids. Let's say on the scan you have a small hole, or there's a little bubble, or there's a little rough surface that you want to kind of smooth out and get a more flush finish to it. The replace tool comes in very handy. However, what people have now utilized it for is actually for immediate dentures, to be able to virtually extract teeth on a model. So again, gone are the days where you have to grind the heck out of a tooth on a model physically before scanning. Now you're able to virtually extract the teeth right within the software. So that's really nice. And then the reset model, you do have this available in the prime scan as well, but it is essentially allowing you to reset the model if you've made any changes, and it'll bring it back to its original scan. So I'm going to show you here. So of course, this is a really great scan that my colleague actually did take. However, there are a couple things that we can edit. So for one, they might have captured a little bit of the cheek or the lip here. So I'm just going to use the cut tool. And I'm basically going to come over. You're going to see this cross kind of follows, and this this straight blue line, okay, follows my cursor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click to start with my left cursor. So it's always double click to start with left. Single click will allow you to basically curve this. So if I don't single click, it's going to default to a straight line. So I can curve just using my mouse to curve. and then I can single click to basically tag down each of those lines. Okay, so then I double click to finish, and you're going to see here now what I have is just a little slight hole here on the canine. Okay, so where now my replace tool comes in very, very handy is if I come over here now, I'm going to zoom in so you can use your middle scroll button on your mouse. Your left cursor, your right cursor will allow you to physically pick up your model. Okay, your left allows you to move and rotate. Okay, some people will use a 3D mouse. So their 3D mouse they'll use to kind of rotate it and move around. Then they'll use their right hand to just kind of move the model if they need to. Again, really up to you, but you do have the functionality of a 3D mouse if you want. But basically, there's the middle scroll button on your mouse that you can use to scroll in and out. Okay, so at this point in time, you can basically use this cross where you'll basically double click to start with your left cursor. It's always a double click to start. And you're going to notice that I'm right outside the margin of the hole. I don't want to be in the hole itself. Okay, I want to be just outside of it. So now what's going to happen is you're going to see this kind of yellow golden circle. Okay, so I double click to start, single click to wrap around, double click to finish, always with my left cursor. And then as soon as I did that, it turned yellow. Okay, so you're going to see the option here that says apply. So if I hit the apply button, you're going to see now that it filled that detail in. So what the replace tool does is it visualizes kind of its surroundings and it tries to match the surface area there. Okay, so you can see where that can come in handy, obviously, for something like a virtual extraction. So let's say I did want to virtually extract this tooth, for example. Again, this particular patient probably doesn't need an immediate denture, but just to show you, I double click to start, single click to kind of tag down, and then it's always a double click to finish. So I want to go just slightly outside the scope of the margin, and then I double click to finish, and then I hit apply. As soon as I did that, it virtually extracted that tooth. So that's how our users often utilize this for something like an immediate denture. I'm just going to hit that reset button. However, I will have to just go back and quickly finish this one again because I did undo everything there. So I'm going to hit apply and just fill in that small hole. So that's how you can really easily use the trim tool to kind of trim around the edges there. At this point in time, I encourage you to, just pause this video and practice using your mouse. At the beginning, you're going to notice that that's half the battle. It's just getting used to the mouse. So again, your left cursor does majority of the work with the double clicks, single clicks, and then a double click to finish. Your left cursor as well too, when you are on the gray portion of the screen, you will rotate with your left so you can move all around with your model itself. Your right cursor allows you to physically move this. And then if you kind of use, your left cursor and hold it, it allows you to rotate it. Okay, and then you're able to, of course, move your model physically with this particular arch. Then we've got this box here that says view options. So there's global. So if you do, let's say you kind of get a little bit out of scope, you can't find your model, you need to just bring it back really quickly and you're having struggle with the mouse. This cube here on the top of your screen, this will be a tool available to you where you can have view options. You can look at the top and it'll basically bring it back for you and center it out. Okay, so that's a nice way to be able to, of course, just quickly get back to kind of the center point to be able to kind of refocus. Okay, so that's kind of the nice thing here. So that is the edit model step, exactly as the name would suggest. You're able to edit the model, make any changes that you want prior to now designing a model for 3D printing. So then this next step here, set model axis. Again, now this software thinks that this is a lower jaw. It is an upper jaw, of course, but we're just going to kind of appease the software here. So when you first come in, it usually looks something like this, right? But you're going to notice basically, I'm just going to move my model out of the way. You're going to notice this horseshoe here. This is reflecting the jaw itself, okay? Now in this case, it's reflecting the lower jaw. As we know, this is an upper jaw, but just bear with me here. Obviously, in your actual case, it would not show up like this. It would show up properly with your upper and lower model, or just your lower or upper model, depending on what you've scanned. But then at this point in time, you're able to basically bring this into place. So with your right cursor, you're physically able to move your model. And then with your left cursor, you're able to rotate your model. Okay, so again, your right always physically picks up and puts it into place. And then your left allows you to tilt and rotate. So what you're going to notice on this arch is basically a line straight down the middle. That's reflecting the midline, okay, from a bird's eye view, of course. So one thing to note is when it comes to, your arches, normally if this was, you've scanned upper and lower at the same time, it will show both arches at once, right? So it'll show you both your upper jaw and your lower jaw. So I always recommend moving your upper jaw into position because your lower jaw is in articulation at that point. So it's going to follow and move into its corresponding position. Okay, so focus on the upper jaw when you're on the right-hand side of the screen looking at these horseshoes. Okay, and then basically on the left-hand side of the screen, we've got basically two boxes. So one, we've got the upper left where we're looking now from a facial perspective of the midline. So I just used my left cursor there to tilt. Now I can see that I'm slightly off on my midline, right? Because I've now tilted that model into proper kind of position occlusally, more or less. So what I want to do here now is I actually want to just come back to my right-hand side of the screen and just, again, slightly move and rotate that arch again. Okay, so now I can see from the position here facially, I can see that midline is spot on, okay? And then on the lower left-hand side of the screen, this reflects the occlusal plane. So again, the software right now thinks the lower jaw is the upper jaw, it thinks it's flipped, but that's essentially because of the way it was scanned on the prime scan. So again, in a real case, it wouldn't be like that. But here, basically, I'm just basically gonna hold my right cursor and bring my model down because this is the occlusal plane in question, right? So because of that, I want to bring that occlusal plane down so that the lower jaw reflects that occlusal plane. Okay. Now, when it comes to this occlusal plane for making a model, not super critical. But again, these are the same steps that you'll go through when it comes time to designing a denture, designing, a more complex case. So because of that, these are really critical for the software to, understand where the occlusal plane is, where the midline is, where the facial lip support line is. So to give you an idea of the facial lip support, this line right here, that reflects the facial lip support, which is, again, that's kind of the bird's eye view of it on the right-hand side. And on the left-hand side, that's the facial aspect of it. So if I needed to move this a little bit forward, I would just come over to the right-hand side and bring that jaw slightly forward. Okay, so holding my right cursor and dragging my mouse. So I encourage you at this point in the kind of webinar here, maybe give me a pause. Just practice this, practice what your right cursor does, practice what your left cursor does, practice moving your jaw into position. So again, I recommend trying to get the right-hand side of the screen taken care of first. So in terms of your midline, your occlusal plane, and then just overall your arch. And then on the left-hand side, tweak the midline and the occlusal plane accordingly. So again, with the left cursor, you're able to kind of tilt if you need to, okay, to kind of, again, slightly accompany the curve of SPI. Again, this is a flat occlusal plane that it's referring to here, but we of course know just as clinicians that we need to tilt it slightly in accordance to that for an actual denture case. And then of course we can look at the midline here as well from the facial view. Now, one thing to note, this horseshoe kind of size here of the jaw, it's a standard size, right? So sometimes you will have a jaw that is slightly larger, more broad. Sometimes you'll have one that's a little bit more kind of internal, right? If it's a little bit more narrow, it'll be kind of more inside here. There is no right or wrong. Again, the idea is that what's key here is the midline and the facial lip support. And then again, kind of looking at the occlusal plane on the left-hand side. We're not too concerned if the patient has a really broad arch that's slightly outside of these horseshoe shapes, or if it's more narrow and it's on the internal aspect of it. Both are correct. Again, line up your midline and occlusal plane and your facial lip support, and that'll be key when it comes time to designing a denture. Now, what you're going to see here is the option that says create model. So what I was mentioning to you is you have softwares like Splint application, model builder application, and partial framework application on your desktop. However, you're always going to get to all of them through this CAD software, the design software it's called, because then it's going to bridge any details. So any changes that I made to this model are going to now transfer over to the model builders because it's a bridge. Okay, so the CAD application acts as that bridge to basically share the data with the application itself. So it's going to ask me, would I like to start inLab model now? I can choose to say, do not show me this message again, and then select start, and then it'll still proceed forward, no problem. Okay, so I'm going to hit start right now, and I'm able to proceed forward. Now, I'm just going to have to stop sharing my screen in just a moment because it's going to open now a separate application. But I do encourage you at this point, feel free to pause me, okay? Pause this pre-recorded webinar, practice in the edit model stage using your left cursor, your right cursor, using the tools. Again, just get comfortable with the mouse. At the beginning, that is half the battle. And people think I'm joking when I say that, but it is really very true, okay? So I'm just gonna stop sharing my screen here. Feel free to pause this video if you need to. All right, so I'm going to share my screen again. All right. So if you are just joining us here after pausing, I hope your mouse clicks are going well. Again, I do strongly encourage you to take the time to learn the mouse because half the battle at the beginning is just learning what the left does, what the right does, what the middle cursor does on your mouse, whatever it might be. But again, once you get comfortable with those things, the workflow of the sidewalk becomes that much easier. So there's two ways to find out that we're now in the inLab model builder. For one, you're going to notice that our intraoral scans that were in color are now in this kind of like stone color material. Okay, so this is also what an STL file looks like if you're ever importing those into the inLab software, which I'll show you in a little bit as well too. But another way to tell is the software will say inLab and then the application name on the upper right corner. So now I can tell that I'm in the model phase. But what is really nice about our software that you're going to notice is it still follows the same sidewalk along the top and the secondary sidewalk along the bottom. So it'll always not let you move forward until the critical things are completed, but it will also prompt you with what you are specifically taking care of in that particular step. So this very first stage, we're in prepare, and it's asking us to clean the model. Now, as soon as we see clean model, you're going to notice that under the tools on the right-hand side, the option to clean model is available. So I'm going to highlight that option now. So it's in that kind of orange yellow color. And you're going to see as soon as I did that, this border follows the edge of my scan. Okay, so wherever my scan finishes, it takes that margin just slightly a couple millimeters outside of that. So what we're essentially telling the software is if we were to hit apply right now, the model height would be 4 millimeters and the base expansion would be 2 millimeters. So the model height being as a minimum, because of course it's going to be a nice flat model base, but as a minimum, it's going to be 4 millimeters. So in certain areas, it'll be higher, certain areas, it'll be just 4 millimeters, okay? And then the base expansion, that's essentially that lip that's created on a model base when maybe we're using a prefabricated model base pouring in stone. Same idea, it's just really for aesthetics. It's not anything to do with the function really. So you can change those. Now you can choose to link the upper and the lower model, meaning whatever you do to one model, it'll do to the opposing. Or sometimes if, let's say you're doing a partial denture on one arch, a complete denture on another, sometimes the working arch might be a little bit thicker than the other arch. Up to you. But essentially what we can do is we can edit this line. So let's say there's a little bit of details that we want to save out on. Maybe we're doing just kind of like a sleep appliance here or something like that, whatever it might be. If I wanted to double click on that orange line, single click again, always with my left, and then double click to finish, I can basically tell the software, this portion can be trimmed away. I don't need that in my model. Because maybe this is just going to be a model to try on the splint at the end of it, right? Obviously you would need an opposing if you were doing a splint, but again, just for sake of what you're able to do here, again, you're able to just bypass anything that's not needed for the scope of whatever you might be printing in this case. So again, I'm just able to bypass anything. Let's say I want to keep the palette, I can, or I can choose to go around it. So let's say I didn't need the palette, I could choose to take this edge outside of the palette of this particular model. Again, very doable if you need. So then at this point, I can double click to finish. All right, so now I've basically got my model base. Again, under display objects, objects being the types of scans. This is very similar in PrimeScan where you can look at your different catalogs that you've scanned in. Same idea, we just call it objects here in the inLab software. So on the right-hand side, if you ever hover over the tabs, it'll tell you display objects. If I had an opposing model, it would show up here, okay? Again, it doesn't have that, so it has just this one arch in particular. But at this point in time, you're going to notice that it still won't let me move forward. And the reason being is that I have to apply these parameters to the base itself so that it provides an actual model base. So I'm going to go ahead and hit apply. And now what we're going to notice is it's going to remove any of these edges here that I have bypassed in the edge of where I want my model base to sit. All right, perfect. So at this point in time, so what you can see here poking through, that's a little bit of the actual palette itself. So if I wanted to increase this, maybe I want to go to 6 millimeters instead. I'm going to go to 6 millimeters and see if that just covers the palette. Again, that would only be relevant if you are keeping the palette in this model. For most denture cases, I'm assuming you'll always have the palette, just because regardless of if it's a partial or a complete or a flipper, it might need that you have the palette present on the model if you want to try anything on. So now we're good. That palette won't be cut out when we move forward. So essentially what we can see here is now we've got a nice model base and we're able to now move forward to the design phase. So in the design phase, what's really nice about all these steps is they're all optional. Okay, so for example, this first tab here is create stumps. What it means by create stumps is removable dies. So when you're working with a laboratory doing crown and bridge, they're able to have a removable die that comes in and out of the model so that they can try the margins or make the margins more crisp and clear when they are ensuring that their margins are adequate for their particular patient. So create stumps is identifying the ability to create removable dies. For yourselves as denturists, I don't think you'll have to utilize this function. However, this is an important step to note because when you are using a Dentsplycer on a scan body for something like an implant supported case, this option here where it says create analog will actually show up. It won't be grayed out like it is now. The software, again, is very intuitive. It knows that there is no nothing present there in terms of a scan body. So create analog is removed. But essentially what the analog is it's known as a DIM analog or a digital analog, and it's basically the implant replica. Okay, so your replica being, what you're used to from a stone model perspective. Now you can identify the same workflow with a printed model by adding in a digital analog where you basically screw in the actual analog itself. So we use either ELOS or NT trading analogs. I'll get into that more in a future kind of more advanced workflow video. But again, you do have the ability to create implant supported models. In addition to implant supported models, you are able to create a removable soft tissue piece for any implant cases. So again, with 3D printing, there are many materials out there where you are able to print kind of like a gummy tissue material to mimic obviously the gingiva mask. However, with the gingiva mask for an implant case, if you wanted to just define the border of it and still print it in the same material as the model, I do see a lot of clinicians and laboratories doing that as well, just because they don't want to switch out the resin tank from, the gummy material to then switch back to the model material. But again, it just depends. If you're printing a whole bunch of gingiva masks, it makes sense. And if you want to be able to really adapt, obviously your case to that for implant supported bars or an implant supported denture, it can be really key to create that removable piece if you need. But again, you can bypass any of those steps. It's not going to force you to take care of those. The other option here is add supports. Now you're going to see the one support option is grayed out, and it's because I don't have an opposing, but you do have the ability to add articulators like a ball joint connector. If you wanted to basically buy the disposable ball joints themselves that connect in, you can add those. But for full arch cases, you have the ability to add a bar if you can't add the actual attachment here. So let's say I wanted to add a bar, for example, you can basically go right across. The idea is now on this bar here, if I had an opposing, I could add a articulator to it. Okay, so that's the idea. There's also another tool that's called the add support strut. So a support strut, if I did again have an opposing, I'm able to basically see the upper and the lower invite function. Okay, that's essentially what that is. But if I did want to delete it, again, once it's highlighted in the screen, so I just give it a click, I can have the option to delete this bar if I don't need it. So I'm going to move forward to the finalize phase. So in the finalize phase, a couple key things you can do. One, you can add a text label. So if you needed to add a label to be able to, of course, just identify who the patient is, identify your clinic name, whatever it might be. You have that functionality, but we also have the ability to do what's called carve out model. So again, when you're 3D printing, that's considered additive technology. So if you have a solid model, it's going to take a lot longer and a lot more resin and time, right? So that ultimately is going to cost more to print that physically. So what most people will do is they want to hollow out. So if I hit carve out model and apply, it's going to basically hollow out the internal component of the model without affecting any of my working space. So again, that's really key to be able to save time and money ultimately in your printer, because now it's not having to print a solid model with all those layers. It's now able to bypass this internal component, but again, without affecting anything here. Okay, so that's really key. So that's the carve out model tool. Again, if I want to place the patient's name or the clinic name, whatever it might be, under text label, there's this edit text box where I can basically identify at this point the font size, and I can come over to my model and double click to stick. Okay, now you're going to see here when I rotate this model, this text, it protrudes out of the model. That's called non-recessed. If I wanted it recessed, I just choose this option here. And now you're going to see that same case is now indented into the model. So you have the option to have it either protrude out or stick into the print itself. But you can, at this point in time, once it's highlighted in this blue, you can choose to move and rotate it if you want. So if you needed to move it, maybe it was a little crooked when you first placed it, not a problem. Or you have the delete option as well too. So then from the export phase, in the finalized phase as well too, you can export the case. So if you hit export here, you'll have the ability to identify where you want this saved. So let's say I want this going to my desktop. I'm going to say test model. So now I'm telling the software that on this PC on the desktop, the file name is test model. Now here you're going to see save as type. This is extremely important. When you use the drop-down menu, that's where you're going to see STL as an available file type. STL is considered an open file when we're talking about digital dentistry. So STL, kind of consider it like a PDF. Doesn't matter if you're an Android user and I'm an iOS user, we can send on our phones to each other PDFs and open them without issue, right? Because it communicates on both platforms. That's the same idea with an STL. Doesn't matter if you're using inLab software to design and then a third-party printer to actually print a model, that STL file will be what communicates with both softwares, okay? So at this point in time, I can select STL and then basically identify that I want to save this case. So I'm now saving the STL itself. Now it's worth mentioning that when I hit save there, I'm saving just the STL. STLs are considered raw data that go through a printer to manufacture or a mill as well too, but nobody really mills a model. However, I'm not saving the design itself. Okay, in the actual model builder. I'm saving the STL of the design, yes. I'm saving the scans in the inLab CAD software, the design software where we were able to edit the model and things like that. But if I want to actually save this model builder design, because again, we bridged it to another software, I need to now save here. So if I hit save as, where you see save as type, it defaults to what's called an inLab model case or a .mdl file. And so I'm going to say test model, and I'm going to save. Okay, so now if I needed to go back, edit anything, let's say I printed and, my base wasn't thick enough and it was a little, or it got, damaged before curing, whatever it might be, the idea is that you can just double click on that icon wherever you saved it, it'll open up directly into Model Builder, so you can bypass the CAD software. Now, it is worth mentioning that for most people with the inLab Model Builder, they will not include saving it as a design file. They'll save just the scans themselves for obviously college purposes. You have to keep your patient data for a certain amount of time. So they'll save those digital files, but they might not save this model builder file. Again, it just depends, because once you get comfortable with the model builder, it's only going to take you maybe 5 minutes to design at most. So because of that, some people will say, worst case, if anything happens to that STL, I'll just redesign the model, right? But realistically, if you needed to reprint because something did happen at the time of cure, you can just send that STL file back. You don't have to redesign, right? So a model, because it's not really well involved, a lot of the times people won't save it. But at the beginning, if you want to, you have full functionality. So I'm just going to stop sharing. So that was the model builder software. I'm just going to reshare my CAD software now. So it is worth mentioning again that the inLab model builder here, or sorry, the inLab CAD software. So again, we're now in just inLab CAD that we can tell because it says just inLab. If I hit save, it's now saving the patient scans here, which is again what I want, because not only is it saved in the prime scan, it's now also saved in the inLab software. Okay, so you always have those patient records for your college. But I'm going to close out this case now here. And we're going to open up one to design a custom tray now, because I want to show you that workflow as well. All right, so we're just going to open up this case here. So again, I encourage you at any point in time, pause this video. If you need to refresh on anything, you can always rewind. You will also be given a lot of PDF documents and video tutorials that walk you through specific functionalities so that you don't have to necessarily go through all of the design components again. Okay, so you do have that functionality should you need to. Okay, so now we will see our software here. So in the administration, under Splint and Tray, I can identify that I want to create a custom tray. Okay, so now I've identified under indication Splint and Tray, case details is upper jaw UJ. Okay, now in this particular case, it was scanned on what's known as an INEOS X5. So that is a tabletop scanner from Dentsply Sirona, where it scans models and impressions, right? The thing is that with the INEOS X5, that is a great, obviously detail for, using the traditional methods of capturing records. However, for the prime scan, you can also use your prime scan like a tabletop scanner, right? You're using it as a handheld scanner. So you're able to scan models and things like that to be able to, of course, design all your components. So that's why the question is, as a denturist, do you need both? Not necessarily, right? If you have just the INEOS X5, it's a fantastic option. The only difference being that you're still going to take traditional records that your patients are familiar with. Now, if you want to just prime scan, absolutely not a problem. You're still going to utilize it in a hybrid method. And what I mean by that is you will still need to take traditional impressions, like final impressions, whether it's a wash impression inside an existing denture, or whether it's a you're actually taking a full final impression in a custom tray, pouring it up into stone. At that point in time, your stone model can still be utilized with your prime scan as a handheld scanner. Okay, so that is worth mentioning, that you can get by with one or the other. You don't have to have both options to go digital. You really can have one or the other at this point in time. But for the scan step, I just want to show you here, if you did want to import STLs, so again, if you wanted to, physically import an STL from a third-party scanner, maybe you work with another clinic that has a different scanner than the prime scan, rather than sending through the portal, they can send you via email or Dropbox or WeTransfer an STL file. And at this point, when you come into the scan step here, you're going to see that the objects are referring to the scans. Okay, so you'll see in this particular case, it defaults to upper jaw, lower jaw, and bite rim. However, in most cases, like let's say a custom tray, realistically, you'd only have one arch. So you could import just one arch at a time and design one tray for that patient at a time. Okay, but basically under the method, instead of scan, you would just select import STL. You identify your file path, and then you can basically find your STL file at this point in time and import it into the system to design. Okay, so it's kind of the workflow there. Now for the model step here, again, the same rules apply in terms of managing kind of the sidewalk itself. So we're in the model phase, and the first step is edit model. So exactly as the name would suggest, we can go through, take a look at our model. Is there any changes that we need to make prior to designing our custom tray? If there is, we have the ability to use the tools like the form tool, where we can, again, add material, smooth material, or remove material from the model. Then we've got the cut tool where we can, of course, trim something away. So again, feel free to pause the video, practice on your own scan, how to remove material, add material, how to cut material, and even how to use the replace tool. So again, when it comes to the replace tool, let's say this little pocket here was going to affect the custom tray or something like that. I can double click to start with my left cursor, single click to tag down, and then double click to finish, okay? And then we hit apply. And that's the workflow there. Okay, so it's again a really nice workflow in terms of how we utilize the replace tool and the other various tools in this particular software. So in the check occlusion, this comes up when you do have an upper and lower scan. Really all we're looking at here, there's nothing to do in this particular step. It's really just showing you that everything is stitched together properly in terms of the patient's bite. Now, when you're doing a custom tray, typically what I recommend with the prime scan is scan one arch at a time, send them through the portal, and then just design one at a time, right? So you'll scan one arch, move forward, because if you scan just one single catalog in the prime scan, it'll let you move forward. As soon as you scan basically upper and lower, it automatically needs some type of a bite. But of course, when you're looking at an edentulous patient where you're trying to design a custom tray, you technically don't have the bite yet, right? Because you're, of course, using that final impression to create those bite records. So because of that, you want to ensure that make it easier for yourself, just do one scan at a time, send through to the portal. And then when you download each individual case, you can design, the upper tray, the lower tray, whatever it might be. So that would be my recommendation. So then the set model axis step, again, I think this was a pre-designed case. So I'm just going to reset it just so you can see how this functions now with the two arches. So again, we use our right cursor here on the right-hand side of the screen. I'm just going to move this up out of my way. So again, my right cursor will physically allow me to pick this up and move my model into the position of the midline. And then I can rotate with my left cursor. And then now I'm going to look at my left-hand side of the screen and I can see that my midline was just a little bit off based on my wax rim. So I can change that accordingly. Now on the left-hand side of the screen, if I need to tilt this or move this up for the occlusal plane or anything like that, I have that full functionality to do so. Okay. So you have really flexibilities to be able to adjust as you see fit. So then the final step here is create Michigan Splint. So exactly like the model builder, it's now going to use the bridge and transfer any changes that I made to my model, any details that I provided to the software. It's going to transfer that over now to the inLab Splint. So I'm going to hit start. Again, I'm going to pause sharing here for a moment because I am going to have to reshare my screen for the Splint application. So again, take the time to pause the video at any point, play around with your mouse, get comfortable with it, because when you follow up with this session, there's going to be Jonathan Verroche kind of coming on with the next virtual component, and he is going to show us basically the workflow for a complete over complete denture. So again, if this has been a lot of information for you to start, I encourage you to pause it, get comfortable with this component before continuing on, right? Because then at that point, he'll jump into complete dentures before you come to level 1 at our academy, okay? So again, really great way to get kind of comfortable with the software. So I'm just gonna reshare my screen. Again, we are in the Splint application. So we can now tell we're in the Splint application because it says inLab and then Splint on the upper left or upper right corner, okay? So you're gonna notice that we're in the Splint application, okay? Now, one thing you might notice is that technically when it comes to the workflow here, where it says select design type, okay? We need to identify if we're going to be doing a custom tray or a model, or sorry, custom tray or a splint, okay? Because the software can do both in this stage, so it needs to know which one is it designing, okay? Is it designing a splint? Sorry, my tools are on the other side here of the screen. I was looking for them. So basically, are we designing a splint or a impression tray? Okay. So when it comes to creating a splint, the software needs to know that because it's going to set up the stages of design a little bit differently than it would for that of a custom tray. So I can follow up the splint design later on, but we are going to focus on impression trays currently. But where it says select active jaw, I initially chose upper jaw in the previous software. However, if I wanted to change my mind and design the lower first, I could. However, I'm going to stick with upper jaw and I'm going to select create impression tray. As soon as I did so, you'll see that now the next step of the sidewalk opened up. But again, it won't let you move forward until that is complete because it needs that data before it determines the path of design, right? So then the set model axis, you're going to notice that this is the exact same step that we already took care of in the previous software. The reason it's here is there is essentially a shortcut on the previous software where you can bypass that step. So because of that, it forces you to address it here now. But what it also does is if you ever skip that step in the previous software where you maybe needed to make final tweaks here because you thought, oh, you know what, I didn't line that up as well as I thought I did. At this point in time, you can double check your work. So utilize it as exactly that, a way to double check and confirm if any changes need to be made. So at this point in time, if there aren't though, if you're happy with the way it looks, again, this is for a custom tray. It's not super critical to have the occlusal plane or the midline lined up because you're designing the custom tray yourself. So it's not too critical there. But we're going to move forward to the prepare phase. And again, you're going to notice here with the form tool, we can add material, smooth material, or remove material from this model prior to designing the custom tray. So again, if you didn't take care of edit model, you have a few of the tools available to you in terms of the form tool to be able to address it here now. But again, that's why I always recommend make those changes in the edit model stage of the CAD software because you have more tools at your disposal, like the replace tool, which is probably my favorite tool for models. But really where we want to get to is this next step here, define insertion axis. So what we're defining here are the undercuts, right? So there's of course going to be undercuts. It's a full arch case, and we're going to be able to minimize them in the way that we print this tray, obviously based on the print platform. However, we want to identify and try to minimize undercuts where we can. So on the lower left, we see a legend here with a kind of a color mapping scheme that identifies specifically the values of these undercuts based on the color that we're seeing, okay? And where we got these colors is based on this insertion path that we currently have. So imagine with this arrow here that there was basically a line that goes from the tip of this arrow into the palate and then forward. That's essentially at about a 90-degree angle. So it's insinuating that that's how the tray will be inserted into the patient's mouth at the time of use. So obviously when we look at the way we take traditional impressions, realistically that is kind of how we take an impression. We don't go at it from the patient's throat or right from the anteriors. We typically kind of go in and then we tilt it slightly towards the anteriors. So we want that to basically be how this arrow is insinuated and situated. So with this target here, we can either use this as a way to bring that forward ever so slightly. So we're maybe taking it from a 90-degree angle to maybe an 80 to 85-degree mark. That's more than acceptable. The other option as well too, though, is to physically use this arrow and tilt it slightly. Now we don't want to go all the way to the anteriors. That's not quite how we would take the impression, but ever so slightly to kind of, anywhere from kind of that 90 to 75-degree mark. That's typically what people are seeing here in terms of minimizing and managing those undercuts. So the next step here is to check the block out. And what we mean by that is the software is now going to block out any undercut that it visualized. Okay, so right there, it had obviously, identified a couple areas in kind of green and yellow of where some undercuts were present. That's not a problem. We are able to check the block out. So if I want to turn off my lower jaw under display objects, I can just give that a click. And then here you're going to see blue now on my model. So a couple things to note. If you select the reline option, you can now see below to where the color mapping was. So you can see exactly where the software has blocked out undercuts for you to ensure that it's not going to be affected in your impression. However, you do have a couple options that you can do additionally. So let's say this patient had a really kind of deep portion of the ridge that you were worried was going to kind of engage with the impression material, make it hard to, take the impression out. Or if it's a custom tray for somebody like an immediate denture case where maybe you're worried with a tooth engaging with it. One thing that you can do with the reline option is you can choose a height in millimeters and you can choose, so I'm going to show you here, if I double click to start, always with my left, single click to tag down, and then double click to finish, you're going to see here that I created a thicker block out at this point at 0.5 millimeters. Okay, so you're able to block out certain areas. Okay, so that's one way to do it. Again, not commonly used necessarily for a custom tray, but again, sometimes critical for a splint if a patient has a diastema or something like that. That's where the height tool can come in very handy. However, I do want to point out the form tool. You have the ability to add more block out, smooth the block out, or remove some of the block out. Now, when you do select the remove option, it is worth mentioning, I'll just show you on the model base, it is removing just the block out. It's not removing anything from the model base itself. Okay, so the model's not affected. It's just the actual block out that's getting removed. But with the add option, I do want to mention that with the max wax thickness, you can set the standard for the software. So let's say you say to the software, okay, I'm going to add some block out here. Doesn't matter how many times I go over this, it is not going to be going over the 0.4 millimeters that I set. Okay, so again, that's super critical and key to ensure that we're not, adding too much block out in an area that we might be requiring just a little bit more material. You can set the standard there for the software of what's the threshold to stop at in terms of millimeters. Okay, so that's really key. Now, a question I commonly get asked is, this is a full arch case. Do I need to blanket the whole thing with block out to accommodate for my impression material? You do not need to. In the next step of the software, when we're designing our actual tray, we define certain parameters in terms of the thickness of the tray and what's known as the lift. So that's directly going to give us the spacing of how much material space are we giving for our PVS or any other materials that you might be working with. Okay. So when we move forward now, we're in the design step. A couple things you're going to notice under the tools, we have basically just the, where's my tools here? Oh, over here on my side again. So basically under the tools, you're going to notice that we've got create impression tray right now and add implant channels. So if this was an implant pickup impression tray, I can add channels where I can define the diameter and the height of the channel. It defaults to being an open tray impression. However, if you wanted a closed channel, you can just select closed channels at that point. But the idea is when you come over to your model, you're able to, if you use your right cursor, you can kind of rotate and angle these implant channels if you need. But as well too, at this point, when you hover over, if I just double click with my left, it will essentially stick those holes into the tray itself. Okay, so that they'll be added to the tray once we create it for any pickup impression trays. So that's really easy to do. But where we want to select here is we want to select create impression tray. I would personally suggest doing create by line versus create by plane. Essentially, the difference between the two, both are doing the same thing in terms of defining the border of where your tray is going to sit. However, the create by plane might get it to you a little bit faster. But what you see here is this flat line that shows up with this arrow. If I move this, what I'm basically saying, and then I can tilt it with this flat cylinder here, what I'm basically telling the software is anything above this blue kind of flat line here is going to be part of the actual tray. Anything outside of the scope of it is going to be outside of the tray. So again, when we're talking about a custom tray, it's custom to the patient. So for a night guard, it might work to get just an initial quick proposal for the tray kind of borders, for the splint borders. But for a create by line, I personally think it makes the most sense for the custom tray. So as soon as I come over, again, if I hold my left cursor, I can rotate. But what I'm going to do here is I'm basically going to double click to start with my left cursor, single click with my left to tag down. And then the little clicks will allow me to go over things like frenums, for example. Okay, so again, just single clicks here. I'm going around the borders here. Now, if ever, let's say I do something like this accidentally and I'm clicking too much and I'm now identifying that that's part of the tray. If I right click, it'll back up a mouse click. Okay. Now it's important though that you're just single clicking here. You don't want to be double clicking. Okay. Because then the software is going to think that that's where you're finishing your line. Okay. Which will just make you have to do a little bit more work to fix the edges of it. It's not impossible to do. It's just a little bit more work. So again, you just want single, nice little clicks. You don't have to go too aggressive with the clicks. I recommend just taking your time. Single clicks. Now I can go around my frenum and finish up and double click to finish. Okay. So now I'm going to have basically my border of my tray defined. where I can continue to edit it if I need to. Okay, so if I needed to, let's say I wanted to fix up my frenum a little bit, maybe bring that down just slightly, I'm absolutely able to. So when it's highlighted in kind of that green color with the purple border, I'm always able to change and adjust accordingly. So the thickness and the lift here on the right-hand side, those are the parameters that we now need to apply to this tray. So for example, what sometimes people will do is they'll call me and they'll say, Michelle, something's wrong with my tray. It won't move forward, but it's paper thin. I can't proceed. The software won't let me. That's because we haven't applied the parameters to this actual tray. So what we need to do is just give it a click so it's highlighted in green, and we need to ensure that the thickness is set and the lift. So the thickness referring to how thick is this tray going to be material wise, and then lift referring to how many millimeters am I giving for my impression material. So let's say I want to up that to 2 millimeters. I can now hit apply, and it's going to apply those parameters to the tray itself. Okay, so now if I look here, if I kind of zoom in, I can basically see that there's a slight gap between, of course, the tray and the actual model itself. And because that is my lift, that is, I'm defining how many millimeters I'm giving for my impression material. Okay, so a couple additional things I can do at this point. You're going to now see that 2 more options came up under my tools. So I can add a handle, either a front handle or a side handle, where I can control the width, the length, the height, and what's known as the L-shape offset of the handle. So let's say I come over to my model itself or to my custom tray. I'm going to rotate this to the position, and I'm just going to double click. Now, once I double click to place that into the actual handle itself, I'll basically just give it a click if I want to move it. So let's say I want to move this up. Sometimes people like to tilt their handles of their trays. They can tilt it, or they can use it to move and rotate as well. So let's say I wanted to physically move, I'm able to do so. Okay, so the idea is that it's very easy to make any adjustment should you need to. So then at this point here, I've got my handle placed. I can change any of my parameters when it's highlighted in green like this. So let's say the L-shape offset, for example, I wanted to increase or decrease that. That's kind of what it's essentially achieving there, is basically just the shape of an L for the handle itself. Or if I wanted to, again, maybe I tilted it too much, I want to fix that, I'm able to just quickly tilt that down. Okay, so that's kind of what you're able to do with the add handles. Now, the other option below add handle is create insertion stop. Really, that's referring to a tissue stop. Okay, so it's the exact same thing. The only difference being is that they're calling it an insertion stop here. So if I select create insertion stop, let's say I want a couple tissue stops on the palette. Not a problem. I can select create insertion stop, and you'll notice that the cross kind of follows my cursor again. So I can double click to start, single click to kind of tag down that line, and then it's a double click to finish. So I can create that tissue stop. So let's say I want to have one on the other side of the palette as well. Double click to start, single click to tag down, double click to finish. Okay, so I can create those tissue stops really easily, and then I'm able to proceed forward to the finalize phase. Now, a couple times I get asked, you know, am I able to add retention holes if I was doing maybe a certain type of material? Am I able to add a text label for this patient? You're able to do all of those things. So one, we can add the label to something like the handle. So let's say we wanted to do test. Again, we just double click where we want to place it. However, if we wanted something like retention holes, when you select add holes, you can determine the diameter and the distance, the diameter being of the hole, the distance being the distance between the holes themselves. So let's say I want to decrease that a little bit. When I come over to my model, if I'm going to hold my left cursor and basically just erase over this, you're going to see that I've got this orange border highlighted. Okay, so I'm just holding my left cursor. Now you can make the tool bigger or smaller. Okay, so let's say for the vestibule area, I want it to be a little bit smaller. What I can do is I can hold my right cursor down, move my mouse up and down, that's a shortcut. And now I can make that a little bit more small there, kind of get into those areas that are more challenging in terms of space. Okay, so now I've highlighted this area. If I hit apply, I'm going to apply those parameters that I just created to the tray itself. So it's going to add the holes at 2 millimeters of diameter and the distance at 4 millimeters. And now I'm going to have my retention holes really quickly just placed in my tray itself. Okay, so that's really nice. Now, if I wanted to add a couple additional single holes, I can add single holes, and then it becomes basically like a hole punch. I'm just double clicking to basically add those in, almost like a hole punch, right? So it makes it really easy. So then at this point, once you're happy with the tray itself, you're ready to export the case, right? So when you hit export, again, you'll identify where you want to save it to. So maybe you have a folder on your desktop that you created. If so, it'll show up here. Otherwise, you can just identify the desktop even. Test tray, I'm going to call it. And then under save as type, same thing with the model. Just make sure that you change it to STL if you're using a third-party printer to be able to then save this tray and export for printing. Okay, so now that the idea is that STL file can be brought into your printer software, you can nest it in certain ways, and then you're able to, of course, go ahead and manufacture it. Okay, so that has been the Splint application. Now, again, I've saved the STL file for 3D printing. That's the raw data of the design itself. But if I want to save the design to be able to tweak it later, I want to come up to my menu button and hit Save Case As. And then again, now I'm in the inLab Splint file, which is a .sp. So that means I can go back and edit if I need to. So that again, we're always saving this patient's scans in the CAD software, but any of the applications, because they're bridged and in a separate application on its own, we have to identify if we want to save these files as well too. Okay. So that has been the Splint application. So that basically today we've gone over how to add in yourself to the portal as a laboratory. We've gone over the model builder software and how to download files from the Connect Case Center portal into the inLab software. And we've now gone over the custom tray workflow. The last thing I am going to show you before we sign off from the basic components of the software and before you now then are introduced to Jonathan Verroche is I'm going to show you how to import an STL file. Okay, so again, it's ideal to know that workflow for when you are, you know, of course, identifying any times that you're working with a third-party scanner, or even when you've maybe exported a file from your prime scan as an STL, you're able to re-import those into the inLab software as well. So I'm going to show you how to now do that, because it's still a key component, of course, to just know what you need to do with your files. All right. All right, perfect. So here we have our home screen. Okay, so normally we go into the Connect Case Center when we want to download a case from our prime scan file that we've sent through to the portal. However, anytime we want to create a new case, because maybe we are importing STL files instead, we need to look at Add New Order and Add New Case under Order Management, which is the home screen of the inLab CAD software. So Add New Order would suggest we're adding in a brand new patient file. So I'll just show you here when I select Add New Order. It takes me to this screen here. So here we can delete the dentist name, put in your clinician name, and then we can put in the patient name. Okay, so that would be Add New Order. That means we're adding in a brand new patient file. But let's say under Software 20 Patient, okay, so that's the Software 20 Dentures patient name. Let's say I want to add a new case. So these are all the patient cases under Software 20 Dentures, okay? If I select open case, I will open up an existing case. That's how you can always get back to it. So let's say you start designing today, you want to finish tomorrow, you can save it and go back to the design anytime. That's no problem. But if I want to continue to add to Software 20 Dentures patient file, I can hit Add New Case, and it's now going to take me directly into the administration phase. Okay, so that's basically the difference between Add New Order and Add New Case. Add New Order, you're adding in a brand new patient file. Add New Case, you're adding to an existing patient file. So that's the main difference between the two. Okay. So in the administration, we can identify what we want to do here. So let's say I want to make some models here. I can identify my upper and my lower. I'm going to move forward to the scan step now. Because one thing you will notice is when you download from the portal, from the prime scan, the scan phase will be grayed out, and that is normal. The reason being is that you've already taken care of the scan on the prime scan side of things, so you don't have to do it again here now, okay? So under the scan step here now, For the object list, you're going to see upper jaw, lower jaw, and occlusion. Those are the three that it defaults to, just like on your prime scan. However, the method here, it says scan. So it's, if you look at this diagram here, it's thinking that it's going to be using an INEOS X5 scanner. However, we don't actually have that attached. So instead, we're going to change the method from scan to import STL. And where it says file path, I just basically have to find my file. Okay, so let's say I'm going to STL files. I can essentially select my upper jaw, and I'm going to import my upper scan. Now, one thing to note, from most intraoral scanners, when it comes to importing an STL file, most of them export just two files. So let's say you've taken the upper, the lower, and the bite. It's actually going to export just two STL files. The reason being is that the occlusion scan is stitched together with the upper and the lower scans. So what that means is when I change my method to import STL, I've now selected my lower jaw just by giving it a click. When I select my lower jaw, one thing that you're going to notice is that the model step on the sidewalk automatically opens up, and I didn't need to import a separate occlusion scan. Now, the reason being is because the occlusion is already considered with these files, okay? Now I might be eating these words here. Okay, hang on. Let me see the upper jaw. Maybe I didn't import the right file. That's weird. Normally, when you do an STL import, you do not have to do that. All right. So what I did there is I literally just imported the upper or lower jaw back into the occlusion, and that seemed to work. So then you can see here, basically I've got my upper and lower jaw in here. So if we look at the occlusion, I mean, this is my particular, like this is actually my arch, and I do have a deep bite, so that these contacts definitely reflect that. But you can see here the occlusion is set based on my bite on my my patient scan. Okay, so at this point in time, that has been the kind of introduction to inLab. So we looked at, of course, setting you up on the portal as a laboratory, now that you are both a clinician and a lab on the Connect portal. We showed you how to download cases directly from the portal after accepting them and begin working with them in the inLab software. So again, that's the integrated workflow to be able to go from one file to, one component of technology to the other. And then we went through the model builder software, showed you how you can, add supports, showed you how you can, of course, carve out the model, create a model base, that sort of thing. Then we went over the custom tray workflow. Okay, so you saw kind of start to finish the workflow for custom trays. And then we showed you as well here now how to import an STL file. Now, the last thing that I want to show you is how to export an STL file, because every once in a while, if you're sending to a laboratory or anybody else, you might want to export files after you've maybe made some edits in here first, because maybe you want to use the replace tool as step one for maybe an immediate partial kind of case. If that's the case, not a problem. In the model step, you always have to get your scans as far as the model phase first. When you come up to the menu button, which is the upper left-hand corner, my friends in Germany call it the hamburger. It looks like two buns and a patty. You can then hit export. And at this point in time where it says save as type, the inLab cases, that would only be if they're a laboratory working with inLab. If they are not, most would want you to export as an STL. And we have three options. We've got reduced resolution, moderate resolution, or highest resolution. Not many softwares have that available to you. So I would recommend always choosing STL highest resolution. And then you can say models for lab, or the patient name, whatever it might be. Identify where you want it to save to. So in this case, again, I'm putting it on the desktop. Save as, type STL, highest resolution, and then hit save. Okay, so that's basically where you're able to now see that you can import STLs to the inLab software, but you can also export them. But when you are in the inLab CAD software, it'll say again, inLab only in the upper right corner. You have to get to at least the model step of the sidewalk, because that's where the software has generated kind of a 3D representation of the model itself. You cannot get to that from administration or the scan step. You must come into the model phase first. So stay tuned. Again, I recommend pausing this video, practice, for maybe 20, 30 minutes. And then now Jonathan Verroche is up next, and he will take you through the workflow for a complete over complete denture. I do recommend for your first denture case to try a complete over complete. The reason being is that it is a really simple, easy, pre-occluded workflow in the software. So it'll make it that much easier to learn the steps. So again, I recommend just pausing this video for now. Come back to it tomorrow if you need, and just kind of practice what you've learned so far. Always a great way to do it. And then Jonathan Verroche will follow up with more further details in regards to dentures specifically. So thank you so much for joining me. Again, my name is Michelle Glover. I'm the Dentsply Sirona Canada Lab Business Development Manager. It has been a pleasure to teach you here today. Again, I recommend just pausing it, practice, get comfortable with the mouse. You want to kind of crawl first and then walk and then run. Digital technology can be overwhelming if you try to take on too much at once. So I recommend kind of biting off small pieces at a time. It'll make it that much easier. So again, this has been the basic initial insight into the inLab software, and stay tuned for Jonathan Verroche, who will take you through now a complete over complete denture case. Thank you so much.
Hey everyone, welcome to a fundamentals video inLab for denturists. Today we're going to be taking a look at a 3D IPN setup with a reference denture workflow. So in SW20 we actually have two options for denturists to utilize the digital denture workflows. First is our pre-occluded denture teeth, which utilize the 3D IPN portrait-inspired teeth that are pre-occluded in balanced and legalized occlusion and come with 7 different molds, anterior teeth molds with corresponding lower teeth molds. Once you choose your upper teeth mold, it will automatically choose the lower teeth that works appropriately for that setup. Our other option is individual teeth workflow, which we'll go over in a different video. So here on our administration screen, we'll start fresh. And what we have is we click any tooth and it's automatically going to put all the teeth into the odontogram like you would from a carded tooth that you would have ordered. And then what we do is we can check and click one of the corresponding molds that we think is going to be best for that patient. Remember, we'll always be able to change this later on once we get into design. If we have a reference denture to go by, we'll then be able to change that mold within the adjust morphology phase later on within the design phase. So here you can kind of come up with a good idea of what you think this patient is going to use. And we have all the mold charts online, or you can reach out to your sales rep and get a mold chart. So when you actually choose your upper tooth mold, the software is automatically going to choose for you the corresponding lower tooth mold. So this you will not be able to change. It's always pre-occluded and also pre-occluded posterior teeth. So within SW20 we have the option to do balanced occlusion 10-10, balanced 33-33, and lingualized occlusion, which is 33-10. And also a small, medium, or a large mold of those posterior teeth will fill in with the corresponding order number for those posterior teeth. In here, we can click if we're milling our denture base, what we're going to mill it out of. Personally, I always use our loose tone digital fit. It's a great material. So we're going into our scan phase. This was scanned in through our INEOS X5 tabletop scanner. So you can see this is now a reference denture that we have used, we've taken impressions inside of, and we've now scanned this in with our bite block holder, and we're now going to scan in our upper lower models, and it's automatically going to correlate that bite for us. So there's a way that we can bring this in through prime scan as well, but we'll use that in a different video. We're strictly just going to talk design today. So here we are in our model phase. So if you have your model phase open here, what we can do is we can now look at our upper and our lower jaw that has been scanned in. We can clean up around the edges if we wanted to. If we had something that was a void or like a bubble or something that we wanted to get rid of, we can easily do that using our replace tool. Double clicking first, left clicks around, and a double click at the end to complete that circle, and we can apply that to get rid of that small area that, say, if it was a poured model, has a little bit of stone or something on it that you just don't like or you want to fix up. And you can do that with your upper, your lower jaw file. Even if you say have an area over here like this one, it looks like possibly even this area had been cracked when the impression had been taken off. We can go into our form tool and we can actually decrease the strength here halfway, and we can actually just form that in, so it's less of a sharp edge when we go to process this or mill this out. So just lots of options here that we can go through in regards to how to adjust this model according to what you think is going to be best for this patient, right? We can go in and check our occlusion. We can also move or correct the bite if we want to. Because this was scanned within the INEOS X5 and it automatically correlated this bite, this is something that I would always suggest not to really touch. Especially, and as well, when we're utilizing our prime scan, these scanners are so accurate and they should be able to correlate the bite automatically every time. And you shouldn't have to correct the bite on your own. If you do, possibly there might have been a scanning issue involved. And the software couldn't correlate it on its own. If that was me, I would go back within my scan phase and to try to adjust that so that we can get that software to correlate it automatically. And there's little tricks and tips and tricks that we can go over in another video in terms of scanning with the prime scan and also scanning with the INEOS X5 to get the correlation exact, because that's what we want. So we can move on, just moving on our sidewalk down here. Not skipping a step, just going through. We can now actually correlate these models or set the axis of these models with our possible relative plane of occlusion, our midline. But more importantly, all this is really doing is just setting these models so that way when we get into the design phase, we're looking at that model exactly face on. If we actually move this model this way, when we get into design, if you can see on the left screen on the top left, that's how it's going to actually show up within our design phase, and we don't want that. So we want to make the software as intuitive and easy as possible later on. So if we get these just as close as we possibly can, we now can move on to our edit denture baseline. So here we are at our denture baseline. Something that SW20 does, it will automatically calculate an initial proposal for you for your denture baseline. You always have to do a little bit of adjusting for this. You can see down in here, there's definitely some issues going on. If you wanted to just start fresh, that's completely fine. You would just click this delete button down here and you can draw your own line as you please, which we'll do on our upper model. But for this one, we're relatively close. The software was pretty smart and we can actually go around and just attach those lines back together where we think that base is going to be. Maybe smooth out some of the lines as well. This one's a little bit overextended, so we'll bring that up. Just with left clicks to start it, a double click to start that line, then we can drag it wherever we want, make small adjustments to it with a left click again, or make larger lines and left click, and it will bend and it'll make a smooth line in the end. But here we are with our lower denture base line. So the top one we're going to do, or the up maxillary, we're going to do just completely on our own. So obviously this one we're pretty far off. I don't want to go through and edit the whole thing, so we'll just delete this completely, which would be the initial proposal that inLab has set for you. And we're going to start with a double click, left click, and we're just going to follow around, and wherever you believe that denture base line is supposed to go, according to your training, your experience in design, or your experience with that patient as well. If you think that impression that you took was overextended, or even that scan that you took was a little bit underextended, you can now make those adjustments here. But this is more going by what you believe is the true line, or the finishing line of that denture base. And again, just left clicking all the way around until we get to the end. If you make a mistake, like I just did, we can right click that, and we're going to go back. Always going to go back. And it'll only go back to the next left click that you had produced. And then when we get to the end, it's automatically going to connect it together. With that connection, we're just going to do a double click. So there we are. So we have our denture base lines here according to what we believe as a denture, so where that denture base line should be. And we're following the sidewalk, and we're going into our block out phase. Okay, so block out phase. This sometimes is very important. Sometimes it's not very important. For a patient like this, what you want to do is you want to kind of look at, this is how you would be inserting that denture, which in my opinion is completely fine. And these undercuts here, technically that's going to help us for that retention of that complete upper denture. But if you have something like an immediate denture, that you have some kind of extreme undercuts, that's something that you're going to want to adjust. And what we'll do is I will add some block out to this just to show you if you do run into that scenario where you did want to block out these spots so that you 100% didn't have any sore spots or anything like that. And also for milling this case as well, this sometimes helps. So we'll open our block out tool in the top right. We'll set our size of the tool by right clicking, holding down our right click, and going up or down on your mouse pad to fix the size. And you can see it moving on the right side of the screen. If you wanted to adjust it manually, you could also go in here and adjust this manually. You can adjust your thickness of your wax that you would be putting onto that block out. I suggest always just to leave it at the factory 0.1 and the strength about 50%. Because you can see what we do here is we color in the spots that we possibly want to block out, because the block out is going to, the undercut is going to show up in red. So we'll block out those spots with the green, with the tool, and then we'll apply it. And the tool will actually do it on its own, and it will block out where it thinks that green area it needs to be. So all it's really doing is it's not blocking out this whole area, but it's blocking out just that redness area, that the redness, the extreme undercut, right? So don't think that this whole green area is going to be blocked out. It's not. It's just going to be the red area that is within that kind of bullseye, right? And you can do the exact same thing with your lower. Some people like to block out these myohyaloids a lot down in here, something that's really going to cause irritation later on, and we know it's going to. That's something you could always block out. For this one, I won't block it out because really I believe that this retention in these two myohyaloid areas is going to help me. So now we'll follow our sidewalk again. We'll go into our model analysis phase. Okay, model analysis, probably the most important part of our sidewalk here, of our first initial setup. We haven't gotten into design yet, technically. So what we have here is we're going to actually get rid of some of these options here, some of these windows, and we're going to bring this up specifically for one specific thing. So we'll go to our maxillary model here. And what I like to do myself, still to this day, is make my marks on my model, right? So this is something that is kind of more exclusive to the INEOS X5. But if you are a firm believer that you like to actually draw your landmarks on your models before you scan it in, you have the option to actually show the marks when you get to this point to make your life a little bit easier when you go to do this model analysis phase. Because model analysis is really what's going to determine how those teeth are going to be immediately proposed from the software. And if we can get this model analysis as close as possible, it's going to make your design phase within your teeth setup much easier. So this is just a little trick that I have that I still do to this day, is I use my marks. And you can show them or unshow them within your analyzing tools on the right hand side. So we have all of our options here. We'll open up all of this again. So now we can actually see how this is going to propose. So see how this is obviously this is off at this point, because it's going to set these teeth completely off the ridge. So this is in recording to where we're going to place our points to propose the denture setup. So like I said, the closer we can get this, and it actually has, if you go over top, if you put your mouse just directly over top of one of the points, it's also going to tell you where it wants that point to be. Papilla, premolars, tuberosity, and this is the line or the crest of the ridge that it's going to put those teeth or initially propose those teeth over. So once you have those analysis points set, you can go into your lower. We're still showing the marks that we had. If we don't want to and we want to just do it by eye, we can do it by eye too. But we have our marks, so we'll draw exactly just according to our training, 3/4 up, center, and it actually had the rest of them actually fairly well. Because it is going to initially propose where those anatomical landmarks are going to be. So this is a thing that it's relying on you to adjust it according to what your knowledge is, right? So now we've got all of our analyzing points finished. We're going to turn our marks off, and we're going to get rid of our analyzing tools, and we're going to move forward, because now we're getting into the initial proposal of your teeth design. So we're in our parameters now. When we're dealing with denture teeth setups, the only thing that I would ever change is two things. If you're printing not with Lucidone digital print and you're printing with a different denture-based resin, you always want to change the minimal thickness to whatever the manufacturer suggested minimal thickness is. The 2500 or 2.5 millimeters minimal thickness that's preset in the factory settings was strictly for a milling procedure. So remember that when you get to this point. If you want to print them, you can unlock and you can change the minimal thickness of what that base is going to be, again, according to the manufacturer's specific recommendation. If you're using Lucidone digital print, manufacturer specific recommendation is still milling, which is 2500, 2.5. So just a little kind of tip, if you are printing your bases out there, that is something you need to look at. Pocket spacer, this is the space in between where a cement gap, basically. Again, something not to touch. Always leave it at your factory settings of 0.7, and your base is going to create that pocket for that denture tooth 3D IPN perfectly. The one major thing that you can change, if you have a patient that doesn't like rugae, you have the option to smooth that out in your palatine folds area. So those are the only three things that I would ever touch in this phase, because we're using pre-occluded denture teeth that we're going to have to order in, and we have factory settings that say that this is exactly what works. So throughout everything in this kind of parameters or morphology the restoration parameters phase, those are the only really two things you need to look at and need to change if you wanted to change it. And again, moving just along the sidewalk, never missing a step, just kind of going all the way through. So like we said right at the beginning, we were talking about our denture teeth. this one specifically, I have a previous denture, so I'm technically doing a reference denture workflow for this patient. So I have kind of the exact shape of that mold that I want, but I couldn't see it within the administration phase. So now I have the option within the adjust morphology phase to pick what tooth I think is going to be the best mold for this patient according to the 3D IPN teeth that we have available. Okay, so now we'll be able to turn our bite registration down in terms of opacity. So now we can actually take that anterior mold and we can look at this and we can say, does this look close or does this not look close to these teeth? I know it's not lining up yet, but we will line that up in a second. But at least we get a good idea of the shape and the size, which this one, yes, it's pretty close, but if it wasn't, we could change it within our upper tooth molds here, and we can pick whatever mold that we think is going to be sufficient, change it, and be able to look at it directly. Also, being able to change the posterior teeth if it was a little bit too large or a little bit too small, especially if a window possibly will come up that says that you have tooth gaps and the anterior teeth aren't coming into contact or are leaving a pretty large gap in the right here. It will give you a warning and it will tell you your anterior tooth mold is too small and you need to pick a larger one. So that's something that does come up when you're dealing with our 3D IPN teeth sometimes. But here you'll have the option to change that. So let's go back to our 42 because I think that was as close as possible. But you can really play around with what you want. And again, lower anterior tooth molds always just follow what the upper anterior tooth mold is. So it's going to pre-include everything, and then these will be within all your information once you get to the export phase to be able to order it from your corresponding reseller. Okay, so we have our tooth mold. We've gone over this. We can switch a small, medium, and large tooth mold, and then we can move on. So now is when we get into our positioning phase. So because we have our reference denture to go by, we can move these teeth directly into the space with the midline if they liked it, right? If there's things to change, you need to make notes on your own to be able to know what needed to be changed. But here we can take our initial proposal that was proposed by SW20 or inLab, and we can now move it according to where this reference denture is. So one of the most important things when you're dealing with 3D IPN setup teeth is something right here. It's the linear movement of those teeth. And I'll show you why it's the most important. So if you move everything in a linear fashion, it's just going to move it up and down. It's not going to move it, it's not going to scale it, if that makes sense. And I'll show you what that would look like if it doesn't. If it's not on linear fashion in terms of movement, the software is actually trying to scale those denture teeth to fill that gap or that setup area that you're trying to adjust, as well as move them at the same time. So the problem with that, when we're dealing with denture tooth that they're pre-occluded and we're ordering, that cannot be trimmed, and it's not going to be trimmed, right? Unless you're using two-step milling. But that's a completely different workflow. And so when we're at this point, if we're moving these teeth in a non-linear fashion, the software is going to move them in very odd ways because the software knows that these teeth can't be trimmed like the individual teeth can be. So it's trying to find a space for them, but it can't find space because it can't trim this area, and the software knows that this tooth can't be trimmed. So whenever you're moving denture teeth in your 3D IPN or denture teeth workflow, you have to utilize your linear movement of your teeth, which moves them in just a up and down, side to side, back to front fashion. So we'll reset this. So if you ever get to this point where you have moved it in a non-linear fashion, you can come down here to your backup button or complete reset button, and you'll be able to go back just to exactly what the initial proposal was, which is just what I did with this X. If you just want to go back one step, you use the left one, which is just the circle. So I'm going to move things in a linear fashion to get me as close as possible to what my reference denture was. With my linear movement clicked on, I will control A, which will let me grab the entire arch. I'll show you that again. So you can see the teeth that I'm moving right now are the teeth colored all in white. The grayed out teeth are the teeth that aren't being moved. If I click a tooth and I click Control A on my keyboard, it's going to get the entire arch to be able to be moved all at once, which is exactly what we want, because we can already see that it's pretty close. It's not that far off that I don't have to do too much to this. And this is what will happen a lot of times when you scan something in. The software is intuitive enough to know that if you've gotten your analysis points correct and you've gotten your occlusion correct, and this is scanned in and it's correlated perfectly, this is mostly exactly the situation that you're going to be in. You're going to have to make small movements to those teeth to be able to get it to exactly where you want it to. So as soon as you've Control A grabbed everything, you can now hover over top of one of the teeth, make sure you're in linear, grab any single one of these points and just move them into the spot that the reference denture tells you to. Sometimes it might be a little bit hard to see, and you can actually turn down your opacity like I did before in terms of your bite registration to be able to see exactly where that setup is supposed to go. And so we'll keep on moving this, just moving it with any of these points that we have here. That's just moving it forward. If we wanted to move it side to side, we can use our circular movement. And if we wanted to move it, shift it up and down, we use the other. Okay, so here we are here. So we can see this side is actually really nice. It comes into the reference denture very well. It actually looks like almost it's the exact same, but it's not. It's definitely not. And here we are over here. So we can see that this side, the initial proposal, has actually brought it a little bit lingual or inside. So what we can do here is, I don't want to grab the whole arch anymore because I think it's pretty close. I can actually just grab my left or right posteriors from these shortcut buttons up at the top. So within our tools, we have the option to just grab our lower anteriors, or just our upper anteriors, or our left or our right. When I'm doing my setups, if I'm changing my upper and lower anteriors, I'll probably shift them together. So what we do is we can click whatever anterior we want to move, and then shift click the other set. Same thing with your posterior teeth. If you wanted to move your posterior teeth as a set, you can grab both sides. I don't think that that's really beneficial because mostly one side is going to be on and one side is going to be off. So in this sense, I know that my left side needs to be brought out just that little bit. So I can click just the left side posteriors, and I can go in here and just grab them and move them over. And again, I can't see that well, so I'm going to tone down my bite registration. When I grab that entire section of left posteriors, even if I get rid of my lower jaw, you can see it when I put it back in, it's still holding on to them. Because again, we're using pre-occluded teeth and we want to move everything as one. So we'll turn it off again, and now I can move it. So we'll turn on our reference denture, and we can see that we're going to bring it out to probably about here, and we'll still move it in a linear fashion because it's pre-occluded denture teeth. So we'll just move this out. Turn our lower jaw back on, see how far we got it, and there you go. So now we're pretty much exactly where our reference denture was previously. All right, so here we are. We have everything nicely lined up with our reference denture here, and we're going to move on, and we're going to move on our sidewalk, and we're going to edit our denture base now. So it has come up with an initial proposal of what your denture base is going to look like. So we can now turn off our bite registration so we can see exactly what it's come up with, and it's done pretty well according to what I believe it should look like. But let's do some adjusting so I can show everyone on today what that would look like. So when we're in our denture base phase here, or our edit denture base phase on our sidewalk, we now have the ability to form, shape the denture base according to what we want it to be. So if you right click, you have the option to add material, you have the option to smooth out material, or to remove material. My suggestion when you're first getting started with digital dentures is to use the shape tool and shape it anatomically. I'll show you what that looks like. So if you click that, shape, right click, shape, shape anatomical, or just use your tools bar over on the right side, shape anatomical, you'll be able to actually grab your interdental areas. You can grab your cervical, gingival cervical margins here. Even on the inside, you can grab those as well and shift them a little bit more easily than adding and removing your denture base with your tool, with your smooth, or your form tool, right? So that's where I would start, and I would always start a case editing the denture base this way, getting it kind of relatively as close as what I think it should look like. If you want to move things down, move things up, it's much easier to grab the entire margin than it is to use your pinpoint or almost like a paintbrush that you would in paint. But I'll show you what that looks like as well. So if you go into your form tool and you use your smooth tool, you'll actually be able to smooth out that margin as well and make it look a little prettier. I tend to do this with every single step. The canine eminence and all the festooning and everything that the software does, I think it looks pretty good when it gets milled out. So I always leave this area exactly like the proposal is. But you can see, like, even in this area, that might cause a problem in terms of what the patient's feeling. You can always put in here, add your add tool, and just add it in. So it's more of like a smoother transition into your teeth to your denture base. And once you've added that material in, you can now just smooth it out, just like you would just a wax carver or your blowtorch there, your alcohol torch. So that's kind of what the edit denture base phase is going to be. And you can go around and, again, if you hold down your right click button on your mouse, move it up, move it down, you can see in the bottom right side of the screen, the size is going to be moving. So if you want to do like a kind of like a mass smooth, like you would with your alcohol torch, just move it all the way up to the max there, and now you can just smooth out that entire area, just like you would just with your alcohol torch, right? And you can move the strength up and down depending on how much. 50% is probably the best, because then you're not taking too much away. Because if you do take too much away, it's a lot harder to add it on. It's the same thing with wax, right? If you do make a large mistake and you want to recalculate the entire base back to its kind of original, if you made a small mistake, you can always just go back one step, or you can just recalculate from here the entire denture base as you please. And you can do the exact same thing on your lower, just like you did on your upper, in terms of the form tool and the shape tool. So once we have our denture base as nice as we possibly can get it, we can still make adjustments to it later on. So you can get it kind of as close as we can here in terms of the sockets, in terms of the pocket depth, and in terms of the smoothness or the gingival margins or the interproximal. So now we can go to our finalize on our sidewalk, and now it's technically going to create those pockets where those 3D IPN denture teeth are going to be set into. Okay, so it's now created the pockets that our 3D IPN teeth are going to be set into. You can see our upper and our lower arches, or dentures. Now we can make some small adjustments to our denture base as well if we felt like we wanted to smooth it out a little bit more, or even check some of the thicknesses of the denture base. We can do that here within our analyzing tools, our slice tool, get rid of our smile design and everything else. And we have a lot of different things just to kind of finalize. So that's about why we're in this step. We're just going to kind of look things over, kind of finalize everything like we wanted to, just double check. And then we know that our minimal thickness is reached according to the manufacturer specific recommendations. And then we can kind of get rid of that. We can move on. We can make our adjustments to our denture base again the exact same way we did in our edit denture base phase. We have all of our tools the same way, and we can adjust it accordingly. If at this point you wanted to go back and change something, say if you wanted to move this tooth, or this one, or this one, or one, or the entire arch, you would just easily go back into your positioning phase, but you immediately have to recalculate your denture base again. So as soon as you go back on the sidewalk, if you're making any kind of adjustments to the teeth, you need to go through this phase again. You can't really go directly to our finalized step, because then the pocket isn't going to be created, it's not going to be created well, and the digital margin isn't going to match up well. Not saying you won't be able to get it to export, because you probably will, but this is the right way to do it. If you are making movements later on and you see something that you want to change in your finalized phase, you need to go back to your positioning phase and then go through those steps again. So following the sidewalk, always important. So now that we have this is going to be our complete denture setup, upper and lower arches, with our corresponding 3D IPN teeth, which I'll show you when we get to our export phase of how you're going to place that order through your reseller. Okay, so here we have just our denture bases, because we're going to order the denture teeth. So we can get rid of all of this here, and we can bring this down, because now we'll be able to see our denture teeth upper jaw, IPN 3D, portrait inspired. Here's our order form. So we're going to order a 142 QP, a 7M 33P posterior, and our lower jaw, we're going to order a 9M 33P posterior and a 5 QP anterior. This part is very important when you're dealing with 3D IPN, because the pocket that's made is specific to this order form. So you can't order any other tooth that is not this, or it will not fit in this pocket once it's milled or once it's printed in your corresponding printer material that you wanted to use. And now you can just export this file. If you have an MCX file, you can export it directly to your CAM software, or you can actually just start the job automatically. I never suggest to do that, because you do have to adjust the denture bases within the nesting phase, which is another video that we'll have. But if you wanted to export it just as an STL to be able to print, you can export this as an STL down here and save it to your desktop or whatever file that you please. If you wanted to add a try-in to this digital denture, which you always should, even if you've done the whole entire setup, you can always just go right back to the administration phase. We can add a try-in, select whatever material we want to use to do it. It's just going to export an STL anyways, or you can export it to CAM if you're using a wax disc, but I always suggest to print them. And instead of going back through again, we can still go right back to our export if we've forgotten to add the try-in in previously, which is what basically I just did. So we're going to calculate all our previews again, but now we're going to have our digital denture monolithic try-in to be able to print with whatever corresponding printer try-in material that you wanted to use, with the corresponding 3D IPN teeth printed. So this is going to be an exact representation of what this upper denture base is going to be with the 3D IPN teeth already placed. So there you go. And both of them you can export as an STL or to CAM, which whatever material you wanted to use. So that about sums it up. That's our 3D IPN digital denture teeth with a reference denture workflow. And remember guys, we lab together. So let me know some videos that you would want me to make, in regards to some problems that you may be having with inLab software when it comes to our digital dentures.